Hello, my Archeage friends. This is Arid. In-game name is September on the Thunderwing, as well as the public test server. In this video series, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at Larceny and crate farming with an eye on lower level mobs for those who may be just starting out or returning to Arcade. And this may even help those who may not want to compete in some of the more popular zones. Okay, so that is the ultimate goal of this series, but before we get into that, and what this video is going to focus on is part one, which we're going to take a look at my build, my skills, and why I chose each one of those skills, and the combos and rotations I use for farming. Okay, so first of all, about September. This is September on the Thunderwing server, North America. I'm currently playing a max level Revenant with a 8200, 8250, I guess, gear score. Now, I realize that doesn't quite jive with the goal of talking about new or returning players, as you're probably not likely to have such a high gear score coming back or starting out. But the important thing to note is that because my gear score is high, the mobs that I will choose to farm in the second video, I'm going to be doing it with no buffs. And so what I'm thinking is that somebody with like a 6 or 7k gear score could actually come to the same results just simply by adding buffs to their profile. Okay, so as many of you that follow me probably know, I've never been on YouTube talking about my build. Mostly because when it comes to builds and PvP, those are the things that I'm not the guy to talk to, and so I don't feel comfortable giving out that kind of advice. But when it comes to crate farming, I am comfortable talking about the build that I use because I've used it for so long. And I also don't mind talking about my combos and skill rotations. You probably have all seen them before. So here is a look at my build, and I'm not going to cover every skill, but I am going to talk about the ones that I feel are absolutely most important and why. Okay, so the first thing to do is talk about the occultism tree that's over here on the right. There are 3 skills in this main tree that I feel are very important, and those are the ones that I have chosen. Those 3 are, first of all, the mana stars. This is the primary skill used all the time to gather up the mobs. Additionally, I have Hell Spear as well as Summon Crows. This is used in one of my skill rotations, or kill rotations. And the only debatable skill in the passive tree is mana recovery. And I choose this simply because I had another skill point. And also as a farmer, recovering mana is pretty important. That keeps you going. Okay, so on to Aromancy. So in the main skill tree, there are a few skills that I think are mandatory. First of all is Thwart. You're going to be using this to pump your attack speed as well as your Vicious Implosion damage. The next skill, of course, is Vicious Implosion. You use this to pull mobs into you. And finally, you have a Teleport, which is used for mobility and farming at a greater speed. Followed up with Shrug It Off. This is to remove stun locks from various mob effects. And finally, Meditation to regen mana, and this will save you the cost of paying for foods or mana pots. The only one that is actually debatable here is Spell Shield, which I've chosen, but you know, I only typically will use this if I'm fighting mobs that have a tendency to cast magic. Now, so with the passives in our Aromancy tree, my goal here is to get to the 10th passive, which is called Teleportation Discipline. Now, the reason I get this is because it gives you a 50-50 chance every time you use teleport to reset the teleport skill, which of course allows you to use it multiple times. You'll find this very handy as you start farming. Along the way, I find the following skills actually very useful. First up is Absorb Damage. This actually heals you for 7% of damage taken. This is very useful for mobs that tend to beat on you while you gather up the rest of the mobs. The next skill is Hearten, and this one doubles the duration of Inspire. which is the effect that you get from Thwart in the main skill tree. So the duration doubling isn't actually needed if you are one of those 100% perfect people that can manage the cooldown of Thwart. However, I am not. This is because you want to build up as many Thwart or Inspire stacks as possible. Inspire being the bonus that you get from using Thwart whenever possible, so you can increase your damage of the Vicious Implosion skill. Next is Unassailable, also extremely valuable for farming because once it's triggered it will prevent damage for 2 seconds. And because this build, Revenant, is fighting many mobs at once, the Unassailable skill actually triggers quite often. This actually reduces the overall need for healing. And finally, in this 2 skills here, Magic Condenser, I take that because it increases the critical hits by 6%. And of course the main one, as I described earlier, which is Teleportation Discipline. Alright, so now let's move on to Sorcery. The following skills in the main tree are mandatory for AoE farming. Number 1, God's Whip and Freezing Earth. Others I find situationally useful. This is Flame Barrier, Meteor Strike, as well as Chain Lightning. Now, Chain Lightning is one that I actually probably should call mandatory because I find myself using it quite often, typically to finish up mobs that don't die in a normal rotation, which we're going to talk about here in a second. The other skills I choose from Sorcery are the Flame Bolt and Freezing Arrow, as well as Arc Lightning. These skills are actually pretty useful, not for AoE farming, but for 1v1 combat or general gameplay like doing dungeons or world bosses. In the past, I played with using Insulating Lens because it gives you a damage reduction or a damage shield, as well as Searing Rain. Now, Searing Rain I have used on occasion when I know the mobs that I'm going to be farming won't die in a standard rotation, and this is primarily pertaining to mobs like in the library on floor 2 or floor 3, because they have so much hit points. The simple rotation that we're going to talk about here in a second is not enough, so having Searing Rain does help. So in this tree you'll also see the skills that I have unlocked with my Abyssal skills, but to be honest with you, I don't ever use them. I hardly ever use them at all. The only time I will use my Abyssal skills is if I'm farming 1v1 mobs, but those 3 skills are highlighted here, and then in the bottom you'll also see that it has a highlighted one in the passive section, which is just given to you. So on to the passive section of Sorcery. The ones that I find most useful are the Magic Rain Boost, which gives you a 5-meter increase on your sorcery skills. The next one is Efficient Sorcery, which decreases the mana usage of sorcery skills by 20%. So that is a 20% reduction in mana cost for your sorcery skills, God's Whip being one that uses a lot of mana. Also, I have Magic Precision, which is a plus 10% magic critical rate. That's magic in general, not just sorcery, so good on that. And also I take Aranzab's Infusion, which is a 15% sorcery damage increase. Now, the last one that I have taken is debatable. That is Mana Pool Increase. This actually gives you 20% bonus mana or fixed mana. Now, I personally am running this one because when you use Meditate, which is from Aromancy, you will actually get larger chunks of mana back, since Meditate gives you a percentage of your mana per tick. Obviously, the more mana you have, the higher amount your ticks are. Now, the one that I will sometimes swap out to is Mana Flurry, and I find this useful when I'm not farming AoE, rather doing single target killing. That is something that I may do like in Aegis Isle or Whale Song Harbor, where the mobs just have more health. But generally speaking, that isn't Revenant's strong suit. It is used, Revenant is used for AoE farming, so rarely will I take a Mana Flurry as a Revenant. Alright, so that is pretty much the skills that I have chosen, and you'll find me running this in 4.0 when I'm in my Revenant farming setup, which is pretty much always. So now that you know that, let's talk about the rotations as well as the combos. So there are basically two main rotations that I'm going to be using when I AoE farm, and each one starts off basically the same. I'm going to be using my mana stars while I run around and gather up mobs. I generally try to get as many mobs tagged as possible. I will use my teleport to jump to a mob that is slightly farther away. And also note that the mana star range is only 20 meters. It is not a sorcery skill, so you don't get that 5% or that 5 meter bonus from the sorcery passive. So what I generally do, as you're seeing here in the video, I am constantly tab targeting and spamming my mana stars key. Now that is done with my left hand. In my right hand, while I'm in gather mode, I actually tend to use movement with my mouse, not the standard WASD movement keys. If you don't know how to move with your mouse, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is hold down the left and right click buttons. You hold them down and your character starts moving, and then you just move your mouse like you're trying to move the cursor, and your character will change directions. Alright, so on to skill rotation. So the first one is very simple. It is Vicious Implosion and God's Whip. And it's pretty simple to pull off, pretty easy for anybody to master. The key to this one is always remember that Vicious Implosion gets a damage boost from Thwart, the Thwart effect of Inspire. So as you start running around, you'll need to get in the habit of hitting Thwart as soon as it goes off cooldown. So you've probably seen this a lot in people standing around in raids. You just see that flash. That is someone using Thwart. It's just because it's force of habit. You need to get into that habit. And so for low difficulty mobs, and if you really have a high damage weapon or if you're overpowered, you'll find that with a couple stacks or even max stacks of Inspire or Thwart, your Vicious Implosion may actually be enough to kill the mobs outright. If not, the Vicious Implosion actually damages and pulls the mobs into you. And if it's not enough to kill them outright, then you've got your God's Whip that you can spam up to 5 times consecutively to basically obliterate anything in an AoE range. There are cases where you might get interrupted while you're casting one of your God's Whips, or it may just not be enough to completely finish off the mobs depending on your damage. And in that case, you're going to polish off the mobs using Chain Lightning if there's more than one, or Mana Stars to finish off the remainders. So once again, the rotation is Thwart, always be using it, then Vicious Implosion, God's Whip, clean up remainders with Chain Lightning and Mana Star. The second rotation starts off similar, which is Vicious Implosion to pull the mobs to you. Then you're going to hit them with Hell Spear. This is going to damage as well as stun them for a short duration. Immediately follow up with Summon Crows to apply a dot or damage over time. And additionally, this is a combo. Summon Crows after Hell Spear applies another dot, which is poison. Then you're going to hit Freezing Earth. This is usually enough to kill everything. If not, just as before, you clean up with Chain Lightning and Mana Stars. So the rotation, again, Thwart, always be using it. Vicious Implosion, Hell Spear, Summon Crows, Freezing Earth. By using these two rotations back to back, kill rotation 1, which is Vicious Implosion, God's Whip, kill rotation 2, which is Vicious Implosion, Hell Spear, Summoning Crows, Freezing Earth, what you'll actually find is you're very efficient when you start farming. Because God's Whip actually has a 30-second cooldown, the second rotation will come into play. So while God's Whip is on its cooldown, you'll be using rotation 2 and vice versa. So Vicious Implosion is actually used in both rotation, and that works because it only has a 15-second cooldown. Now, considering that you have to loot bodies move to the next area, and then also start gathering all the mobs up with your mana stars, you don't have to ever worry about that being on cooldown. Now, before I wrap up, I didn't talk about some of the skills that I have chosen, mostly because they aren't really used in the 2 skill rotations. However, there are 2 of them that should be mentioned, as I will find myself often using them when farming certain mobs. The first one being Shrug It Off. I use this one actually all the time when I farm Diamond Shores, as you've seen here in the video. So what's going on is the time lock creatures, they actually use a skill called Sunder Earth or something like that. I don't know what it's really called. And this will lock you down, but if you have Shrug It Off, you can pop it. And not only does it free you up from that Sunder Earth, it also makes you immune to the actual freeze effect for several seconds afterwards. Now, this is actually very handy because, again, you're farming multiple mobs and they all have this stupid skill. So one of the most annoying things that can actually happen to you in your first rotation is while you're using your God's Whip to kill everything, you actually get stunned, preventing you from using your consecutive God's Whips. So Shrug It Off and the immunity to those skills is very valuable in this case. And the next one is the Flame Barrier or Flame Wall. It's actually called Flame Barrier. I call it Wall sometimes. I actually tend to use this when I'm gathering up mobs the most, because a lot of times you'll see like there's a pack of 4 of them, and there'll be 1 or 2 that is a little bit away, but not so far away you want to get them in the next group. So what I found that is if you drop a Flame Wall, it actually will not only do a little bit of damage, but it actually slows down the mobs that you've already gathered up that's pursuing you. And that gives you the ability to get to those mobs that are a little bit further away. Now you may think, well, yeah, I can let these mobs beat on me while I walk over or run over to these other 2 mobs. But really, you got to understand the goal of farming, efficiently farming, is to take as little damage as possible. So if you're able to run to these mobs that are a little bit further away while getting beat on, you're going to be taking damage, versus if you can slow them down and get away or get to these mobs quicker, you're going to take less damage, which is the goal. Okay, so that is part 1 of this video series. What we have done is taken a look at the PvE version of the Revenant, the skills that I have chosen and why I have chosen them. We've also taken a look at the rotations and some of the combos that happen, and we've seen their effectiveness here in this video. So the next part of this series, what we're going to do is take a look at low-level farming mobs, and we're also going to be taking a look at a zone that I have never revealed before, mostly because it's rarely viable. That said, I hope you have found this video both helpful and informative. If you don't know, that is the goal of every single video I release. If you feel like I have lived up to that goal, please remember to like and subscribe on your way out. You can also follow me on Twitch, Twitter, as well as Discord. And for those of you who are wishing to kick up your support just a little bit, please consider becoming a Patreon for as little as $1. All those links will be in the video description. And until next time, this is September saying, be well.